So hey, it looks like this is actually going to be able to exist on YouTube. That makes me pretty happy. I wonder why that is. It's strange how certain I suppose it all comes down to what the rights holders want to do and what the sort of rights statuses are of the different properties. I remember reading that at some point that Moonwalker was in a weird kind of limbo vis-a-vis its North American release. I don't know if that's true anymore. For a while, it was only available on Blu-ray, like overseas kind of thing. So I don't know. Maybe there are just strange issues to do with this that are currently making it unflagged. But well, anyway, it's up here for now, so that's pretty good. I wanted to say before we jump back in here, a couple things about the last look at this. The first thing I want to say is that rewatching stuff often, I'll be a little judgmental of my own reactions to things, and I'll say, "Oh, I wish I would have taken this more seriously here," or sometimes I'll wish that I would have been more humorous in areas and not taken it so seriously, or things like that. But it remains a kind of a difficult and slightly derealizing experience for me to watch these films. So I'm afraid I can't really... The danger is that if I self-censor my natural responses to the film too much, I tend to miss other sorts of information as well that are potentially important. So I'm erring on the side lately of just letting the ride be the ride and trying not to omit things too much, and also trying to just be a little free with my reactions to things. But I just want to say that I'm a nervous laugher. So when I laugh, it's not always because I think something's ha-ha funny. It's often because I think it's very strange or sad often, or kind of horrible in some way. And it's just how I release that tension. So expect it. I wanted to go back through some particular sections here. Because the other thing I wanted to say is that these are by no means like anywhere close to complete reads of I miss stuff all the time. And then when I go back in the edit, I see more things. But then when I upload the material and actually watch it on YouTube, again, I tend to see even more things. And so then sometimes we have to go back and aggregate little bits in a slightly non-linear way. But so here's one of those areas. Thank you, Dan, for reminding me that this is the Noid. This was a Domino's Pizza mascot that was a pretty big famous mascot, I would say. I want to talk a little bit about some, I think, unusual properties of the Noid that harmonize with this tableau. But first I want to emphasize the nice image structure we get here in this very last frame of this sequence, right before it transitions into... I'm going to disappear for now. I might pop back in later. Anyway, these two frames sitting next to each other is kind of another property I would note, because each of these images is quite high-dimensional in its own right. But if we were to kind of crossfade or overlay them together... well, this one is inverted, so we'd have to flip it. But once flipped, we could then overlay it here and see that the same properties are aggregating across both layers. I find things like that very, very strange, and it's worth pointing out just in advance of actually talking about the Noid down here. Because a criticism of this might be that, well, look, certain types of scenes are just going to feature lots of objects that I've decided are important in this projection space. So we might just get, like anytime we go into a supermarket, let's say, there's a possibility that we're going to see pairs of red things on the shelving products and so on. Red soup cans or red apples or, who knows what. And so then when I make the claim that, okay, when this sort of material occurs, we get lots of it, you might want to explain that by saying, well, yeah, you get a lot of it because there's a whole bunch of shots that all take place in this big shopping scene. And so, of course, you're going to find a bunch more of that kind of material in all of those shots that appear together in that scene. The visual properties of that kind of scene just make it more likely that you might encounter things like that at chance in the individual shots. But in a situation like this, there isn't really much of a relationship between what's going on in this frame and what's going on in the previous frame. Because you might say, well, okay, we've decided that... Well, actually, we can't even really say that about the glasses because it's all kind of a little weird, right? Like I was about to say, we should just expect glasses in this scene because it's this big kind of Hollywood movie scene. And like, yeah, okay, sort of, I guess, because California, sunglasses. But this is part of a weird neighborhood watch gangster costume thing. This is just nuts. I don't know what this is. These are like steampunk goggles or something. This is some weird costume choice. And there's just yet another guy in glasses. There's actually so many of these glasses. I don't really think we can say that's happening at chance. I think a decision has been made to highlight the eyes because this is a scene about Michael being pursued by media, paparazzi, and so on. So it's quite organized. They put glasses on every single one of these characters. It just so happens that decision then works, it combines with these other elements and placements that must be something else entirely, and we'll get a glimpse into some of the weirdness of that aspect of this when we talk about Noid. But anyway, so ignoring the glasses, which are an unusual, strange element for sure, it is true that because we're in a movie scene, we ought to just expect a lot of cameras. And so you might think that, yeah, okay, we're going to get lots of matches that involve these cameras, but we can kind of explain that away as like I'm not sure exactly how to say, but like a statistical mirage of this type of scene. But in fact, if you look at the way that the following frame organizes, if this button will work, cameras aren't used in this frame. Cameras aren't here at all. Instead, here, cameras enter here, so they're flowing still into this tableau. That's just a cinematic continuity thing that helps you establish the relationship of the last shot to this shot. We're still in a chase sequence. But here we don't have a North Tower represented by cameras and sunglasses. Here the North Tower is just straight up represented by a literal tower. Other literal tower elements that capture the impression of an antenna. And then these things, again, vertical energy, and these are actually telephone wires and so on. So that's all strongly N, but it tracks a completely different set of associative images in the projection space. The previous frame we saw grabs a certain clustering of objects, and in this frame it grabs a different set of objects, but still a set of objects that are conformant to the picture. And then still with this, I think this one works so beautifully with the way that the red brick appears here next to the blue skyline and all of this. Well, so that was just a little point, rant, ramble, not sure about that. Getting in now to this issue of the Noid. In fact, we should probably just get the Wikipedia article about the Noid up. So the Noid was, like I said, this Domino's pizza mascot in the 80s. But the whole setup was that he ruined pizzas. It says here, I love the way this is written, a physical manifestation of all the challenges inherent in getting a pizza delivered in 30 minutes or less. Because in the 80s, Domino's had this guarantee that if they didn't deliver your pizza on time, i.e. in 30 minutes or less, they would refund you the cost of the pizza. Oh, God, this is all so weird. I don't know where to start. okay, I'm getting ahead of myself, right? Because I said I wanted to start with the image structure. That's always better. So yeah, okay, let's just put the reference over here. The red dots on the grandma track the sparkle that flows off the bottom. The Noid, in his red outfit with rabbit ears, combined with the kid, which also has the red M&M, that together glues to form the essentially the body of Kid Atomic, which I want to say, it has these humps along the top. And these humps, there are a variety of ways to read them. This one is more emphasized here in the front. There's just kind of a suggestion of a limb there, possibly in the back. So one way we see those humps represented is as kind of multiple animals with scrambled legs and things. There are many such examples of that. There are a couple, I guess. But another way we might think of those is as ears coming off of the top of it, and so it's from there that we get things like Frank in Donnie Darko. Hold on, isn't it then Frank's Burgers in the Speed Demon sequence? Anyway, I find the image structure that appears there to be just spectacular, especially in combination with the strong North Tower elements here. And I want to say something about that. When in the last episode, when I'm talking about this area, earlier in the sequence, I'm mentioning.
I've been noticing lots of horsemen.
Things about this kid, like right when we first encounter them, and I say that I think that the grandma and the kid form a little pair. And I'm saying, look, this is like Kid Atomic. This is like the explosion, because it's a child, and because we know that the grandma almost has to be North Tower as the parental logos figure, which is just a very primary aspect of how that image comes together, in my opinion. Because she must be N, then this has to be the explosion, and okay, a kid is an acceptable reference object, projection space aspect to grab, It can be a kid, so that works. And then I said, there's a red M&M. So that doubles up on it. We have two properties now that are conformant to aspects of the reference object. It could have been, so the reason I bring all this up is that it could have been objected at that point that, it could have been said, Jordan, this child is in blue, It's mostly in blue, and you're focusing on this one little red thing and saying, therefore, it's like a kid dressed in red. That's like a textbook example of selection bias. You're somehow managing to see a baby in blue and relate it to a fantasy character in red, and then say that that's the primary object when it really isn't, But then look what happens here. So, because that's not me being an amazing predictor or anything, that's just me. I watched the film already. I had actually forgotten. I think I mentioned that I had forgotten that this guy popped in, but I had seen it and knew, at least unconsciously, that he was about to arrive. And so because of that, I think it's very important to remember that we're dealing with sequential aggregating images. That's the whole thing here, really. It's about tendencies in space, but also in time. This child is wearing a blue shirt, but he attracts first a red M&M, and then he attracts another weird red mascot. And then, if you'll recall, as the scene progresses, he eventually gains red pants as well. So there is a lot of red energy on this character. It's just that you have to look at the whole character, which is spread out through time in the cinematic artifact. If you just pick a point in there, you can't make too many determinations on the basis of that one point, So that's how I can say, that's how I can claim that overall this object is a red object. even though it is primarily wearing blue in a kind of literal descriptive context. The elements that gravitate towards it in the image space tend to be red. I mean, this is a weird thing to plop in here at the end. The Noid relates, I guess, in a mundane kind of way, because of this 30-minute guarantee thing. So it's like, we're going to get your pizza to you really fast. So he's like a fast character. We're leading into to the speed demon sequence and all of that. So now I want to talk a little bit specifically about some ideas that hover around the Noid. So the first thing is the fact that he is involved in pizza means that we also have pizza appearing here associatively. You can imagine that there's kind of a slice of gooey, yellow, drippy pizza here. That's an object that relates to the reference material. This section, of course, specifically of the reference material, both in an image-based way and in a conceptual way. The image way is just the texture of the two, the look of that explosion and the look of a piece of pizza they're just very similar. It's not just color; it's also the type of texture. There are many types of texture that might appear in an image. These two really quite resemble each other. It's similar to that popcorn idea that we noted in the previous episode. But then it also relates conceptually, because literally what a pizza is it's a thing that's cooked in an oven. So it brings flames and heat. Remembering here that we're in an inversion, but what I want to say always about inversions is that in an image match context, inversions preserve all the information. Because all you have to do is perform a flip and you can reconstruct the original instantly. So no information is lost in perfect symmetrical mirroring. It's not so much about whether these things appear on the left or right. It's about the fact that the whole thing can be bisected like this, that they fall into clusters or groups, and that the diagonal. Look how perfect the diagonal relationships are here. So it's the relative positioning of the objects and the types of objects and the clusterings of the objects. It's not so much about whether it's an inversion or not. However, what is so remarkable is, what I think is true, although I haven't, I'm eyeballing all this more or less, but what I think is true is that standards are much more common than inversions. I think overall we do receive mainly matches that are correctly handed, which is so amazing that they can even do that, because it's not even necessary. You see, nothing is really there's no reason to do that from a signal integrity standpoint, because like I just said, mirroring is always reversible in a lossless way. So this goes above and beyond what's necessary for a lossless signal transmission. It just wants to make sure that you see the picture the right way. And so I think it usually comes out that way, especially in the posters. But anyway, this one happens to be an inversion, which I think is a rarer type. Anyway, that was a big digression. Apologies. So many things to say. I feel like I'm constantly trying to flip between analyzing content and then also kind of explaining the method a little bit, because I know this is all must seem very weird, or at least a little weird. That was all to do with the fact that he exists in relation to the idea of pizza. The fact that he also exists in relation to the idea of moving fast in a vehicle is now an additional layer of the coincidental architecture at this image location. That's just amazing to me that he should be another character to do with vehicles constellating with the kid and with all this other material. And specifically here, it says that this policy resulted in delivery drivers driving recklessly, and because of this, the Noid, the embodiment of this guarantee, was reworked for the company's brand. But then, after several accidents and one death allegedly caused by the 30-minute guarantee policy, Domino's Pizza was sued for many millions of dollars in damages in several cases. In 1993, after a jury awarded more than $78 million to a woman injured when a Domino's delivery driver ran a red light, Domino's announced the 30-minute guarantee promotions were terminated. So that all happens way later in time than when this film was released, which is 88. But if you think about all this information here, accidents and a death caused by vehicles. So it's not just the idea of a vehicle going fast, it's the idea of a vehicle crashing and causing serious injury. This thing here is so weird I don't even know what to say. Let's just read it. Kenneth Lamar Noyd. On January 30th, 1989, Kenneth Lamar Noyd, a mentally ill man who thought the ads were a personal attack on him, entered a Domino's restaurant in Chamblee, Georgia. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Armed with a .357 Magnum. I don't know anything about guns. Let's take a look at what kind of gun that is. It's some kind of a handgun, right? No, it's a shotgun. Or wait. No, it is. It comes in two types. Aha. See, I really know nothing about this. It's like a little embarrassing even. Well, I don't know what any of these things mean. Whole interesting world here. Well, so anyway, this guy had some kind of pretty serious handgun, I guess. And held 2 employees hostage for over 5 hours. I find that rather odd that it's 2 of them, in a twins context. After telling the employees that Domino's owner Tom Monaghan had stolen his name, he forced them to call Domino's headquarters and demand $100,000 and a white limousine as getaway transportation. Reminds of the white Bronco. After offering to exchange one hostage for a copy of The Widow's Son, that's a Robert Anton Wilson novel. I didn't know that. It's from the sequel to the original Illuminatus trilogy, which I am not so familiar with. I just find that so weird that Raw manages to appear there. Noyd reneged on his offer after a police officer brought him the book. Noyd eventually became hungry and forced the employees to make him 2 special pizzas and a salad. 2 again. While Noyd ate the pieces with his gun in his lap, the hostage escaped. Wow. So nobody was hurt, I guess. That's good. Why is this notable? After the incident, Police Chief Reed Miller told reporters he's paranoid. Weird, joke. Noyd was charged with kidnapping, aggravated assault, kidnapping. Weird. Aggravated assault, extortion, and possession of a firearm or a crime. Why? Found not guilty by reason of insanity. Wow. He was sent to a mental institution, and then he committed suicide in 95. Bummer. Insinuated to have caused Domino's Pizza to discontinue using Noyd, but they say it's for this other reason, I guess. Well, first of all, it's a terrorist situation. This is domestic terrorism, but so what? We now also have terrorism here as an association. So this one detail really brings in with it a ton of in my opinion, quite amazing energy. You see, it's as if the author of this other material, the secret author as it were, I think the divine author, selected this character in a sort of remix quotation context. By putting this character here, it gets all this information in, but it's as if the selection had to have been made from eternity. Because all of this stuff happened way later than this film was made, And well, anyway, the whole organization of what I would now describe as a painting, this whole image, is organized around a reference object that descends from the future. So I guess it shouldn't be surprising that the Noyd is used in a completely temporally non-linear way as well. It's just this one really blows me away. Well, then the other incredibly weird thing to me about this is how similar this situation is to the Pizzagate story. The whole thing is like a weird little foreshadow of Pizzagate, right down to the involvement of pizza. And Pizzagate is a very weird and ominous thing. I want to emphasize, that was a weird bunch of ideas that were connected on the internet by people in a distributed way, and they were connecting them using a funny kind of naive sync logic, similarities between shapes and symbols and the logos of different companies and so on. That all became evidence in this supposed giant pedophilia ring. And, I believe that things like that exist in the world. Well, first, it's not even a matter of belief. Things like that have existed in the world. That's just a matter of, historical record. But I believe things like that exist today and exist in ways that are probably much deeper and darker even than what the culture is currently reckoning with. Epstein and so on. I think things are much worse than that. And I think, so that's what's all to say. It looked to me like, looking into this particular case, the Pizzagate case, that is, we're in Wikipedia. Let's just get the information up here. I didn't go super deep into this, but it looked to me, looking at this stuff, that in the end, this was really just an example of some kind of very bad kind of internet, paranoid, hysteric ideation that then encouraged, in the end, some specific person down in meat space to go into a pizza restaurant and like armed with weapons and so on. So that's a kind of possession by a giant distributed thought form thing. That's a very the best way to think about that is in an occult kind of way, because that's the only way that's going to capture the or in a systems theoretic way. But that involves a bunch of special knowledge and so on. Well, I suppose so does the occult. Oh well, I guess we're stuck with special knowledge either way. But the point is that you have to think about it as a giant emergent effect that then kind of concretizes into an individual and local and linear historical series of actions and behaviors. But this thing up here, we don't know what that is. And I think Pizzagate was a very early example of bad things on the horizon. So I don't know. Okay, that's me doing my sky is falling routine. I always have to say that is my personal equation. That's my bias a little bit. I'm a slightly apocalyptically minded person. I try to compensate for that in myself by reminding myself of that, and so I'll also remind my audience of that. However, this all looks like very bad business to me. And, well, anyway, weird that the Noid should kind of foreshadow it in some strange way here, particularly because what was the Pizzagate hysteria about? It was about pedophilia. And what is the big, weird shadow material that seems to be persistently attached to Michael Jackson? Rightly or wrongly, it's allegations still at this point. Michael Jackson was found innocent. Personally, I think he abused kids. That's just my personal judgment. I wouldn't necessarily try to argue with someone who thinks he's innocent, because we don't actually know. But my personal feeling, kind of looking at the situation as best I can in a spread out kind of way, I think there's just too much stuff going on here. I think he was probably abusing kids in some way, So, but then that's just very bizarre that the Noid sits at a junction here that connects so many strange things. Like something very powerful is interlocking in that region of the frame. There's something else I wanted to say about him, but I can't quite remember. I'm cutting in from the future here, rewatching the footage I recorded yesterday in its raw, unedited state here. And I wanted to record this now because it's very. I have a very fresh feeling about this at the moment. Which is to say, sorry, there have been various peaks along this journey where I have felt the overflowing abundance of the correspondences so intensely that I completely surrender to it, It's hard to it's impossible actually to sustain that feeling, because it's a kind of a feeling of like, relates somehow to religious ecstasy, or maybe it just is that. I don't know. But it just relates to moving through a film like this and seeing how these patterns conform. Some of them are just so impressive, and Moonwalker is one of them. It's a hard film to watch. There's a deep electricity on this film. Look, in the end, this comes down to something probably fairly simple. There is a pattern that can be perceived here. That's for sure, because I'm not the only one seeing it. If you go on YouTube, i.e. if you just maneuver over to your search bar there and search for predictive programming, you will find just a ton of people perceiving this kind of material. And very similar material, and in many cases actually identical material. We're all focusing on the same objects and the same properties, the same objects and the same films. So, sorry, that's objective. That is objective, at least in the way that something like a flat Earth theory is objective. It's a thing in the world that has to be admitted and dealt with. Not that the Earth is flat, you see, but that there are people that believe that. That's a fact now. And so that's a fact here. There's like some horribly obnoxious vehicle driving by in front of the house. It's making it very hard for me to think. I'm now going to demonstrate the power of my telepathic ability and will this truck into silence. Right now, cease. Never works. I don't have that kind of telepathy. I have the kind of telepathy where things just flow into your brain a little bit without you asking for it, Well, and exactly the thing about it is that I believe. I believe that all people are doing this. I don't think there's anything, it's not a special power. The only thing special is the acknowledgement of it. It's just the awareness of it, but that's also, I think, achievable for everyone. So it's just something human beings do that we don't know that we do yet. That's all. It's just a piece of information about ourselves that most of us don't know. And so some people, I think, just have a little bit more of a boost in this particular area of the human being. And so for us, it becomes, in the end, undeniable in one way or another. It just becomes a matter of like, I need a model of reality that can explain my experience. You have to accept that with any model, and even with a nice aggregated collection of models and all of these nice sort of dialectical things we can use to improve our understanding, even with all of that stuff, you have to accept that there are going to be certain things in the world that your model can't capture. So you're always going to have glitchy outlier experiences that might just be outlier experiences, and they don't necessarily need an explanation. You can just say, wow, that was a weird random thing that happened. But when things are happening to you quite repetitively, that's just no longer helpful. Now I need a model that can account for what is precisely not strange anymore. It's not strange because it's repetitive. It remains strange in that it's numinous and impossible. But we can't describe it as rare anymore. So now the model needs to, it has to say, okay, there's really something going on here, because I keep getting this, I keep bumping into this zone of experience or this phenomenon or this idea or whatever it is. For me, that's happened in a few different ways. It's happening in my life because the closer that I align myself with my actual desire is part of it, but it's more than that. My actual calling in the world. This is really true. The more synchronicity happens, or maybe the more synchronicity happens, and the more that I pay attention to it, the more I'm aligning with my true calling in the world. It doesn't really matter, They go together. That's the point. It's the simultaneity of them. Self-actualization individuation, just, I don't know, becoming an adult in a way that is authentic and that doesn't omit the childlike in the adult. All those kinds of things. Those are accompanied by, let's just call them really the most neutral thing we can: apparent temporal anomalies. ATAs. That has a nice ring to it. I say apparent because, we don't really know at this stage. We just know, wow, a lot of us can't help but see these connections now. And that's really how I relate to this. I just can't help it. I would rather not perceive them in a certain way because, and I've said this before, but it remains true forever. So here it is again. It makes me seem nuts to a lot of people. That's just facts, and that's fine. Those people are where they're at. And I'm learning to become comfortable being the fool, being the clown a little bit for people. Some people are going to relate to me as a total clown, if I ever have any visibility, because they're going to say, this guy is just spinning out of his mind, connecting these weird things, these weird, I know, exactly. I'm not naive about that. Too bad, though, because I don't think that's what I'm doing. So, that means one of two things, I guess. That means I really have jumped off the deep end so much that I can't tell my own sense from my nonsense anymore. Although I would also say, that's quite to the point, in fact. Sense and nonsense. It's not obvious what any of that's about, But anyway, things have been happening in my life that have made me this way. and then in this context of this analysis, of this image analysis, I can't predict, of course, how these sorts of things are going to strike individual people. They strike you or they don't strike you. And they can strike you in different ways and various degrees, Maybe it strikes some people as just, that's kind of funny. And that's where it ends, And, well, that's where it sat for me for a long time. But as my process deepened, and as my awareness of this pattern deepened, it really did eventually, for me, it broke me in the end. So I can't say what it's going to do for you, but for me, in the end, the strength of the interconnections, as strange and as weird as they are, is simply too overpowering. So, that could mean a bunch of different things, a bunch of different levels of analysis. But I think it's like this. I think that on the basis of what I've been able to understand about this image match stuff, and very many other sorts of properties of these films, alignments, I don't know what else to say. Somehow, it's organized. Perception is about the intersection of objective structure and something your brain is doing to make a guess about what that structure is. That's just what perception is. That's the whole problem of it. That's the game of it. That's what it's doing. Perception is guesses about environmental states. At least, look, it may be other things, maybe more than that, but for sure it's that. I don't see how you can look at nature and what we understand about it and how the human being evolved and came to be and not get that. That it's, the brain is it's just trying to get information about its environment so that it can survive and thrive. And so that it has to model its environment. And so that's perception. Perception is modeling the environment, but models are always imperfect. A claymation figure does not look like a real person, no matter how perfect the claymation is. It's an abstraction. And the abstraction just means it's something else that is mapping onto this different thing. So all of perception is this way. I'm just performing a kind of perceptual map between two things. Look, the most honest thing I can say about it is that there's an organized connection between images of 9/11 and images in these films. Beyond that, strictly speaking, I have to say, I have no fucking idea what's going on. Not one little bit of an idea, really. Now, that's a tiny exaggeration because, of course, I've got my theories about it, my beliefs about it. So this is an opinion now, but it's an informed opinion that I think that I've tried to make on the basis of the actual data here. And in my opinion, this organization is not something that is being done deliberately by human beings. And in my opinion, that's actually quite a dangerous avenue of thinking. My point is that if you allow yourself to actually believe that, not which is different than investigating it, you know, if you allow yourself to believe that one in particular, you're going to become very angry, you know, because something very evil has happened then. And evil in a way where individual human beings ought to be held accountable, you know? That's like what happened with Pizzagate, which I suppose is why we're looking at this scene. Now I get it. And well, in any case, I don't believe that this thing, in the end, can be explained that way. But it's not because I didn't investigate that line of thought. I did. I actually personally did go through a period where I was wondering about the possibility of powerful magicians somehow being involved in this in a conscious, deliberate way. And there are even hints in the myths that might point you in that kind of direction. Potential little arrows, like for instance in Ghostbusters, when they talk about the building, you know, it was designed as they're talking about Dana Barrett's apartment building, how it was designed to be an occult object, a magical object, planned from the start to be a ritual to bring about the end of the world and so on. And, you know, these are all things that imply conspiracy and intent in combination with magical goings on, you know. So when you're seeing these other things that are now transgressing the fantasy reality boundary of the whole artifact, the whole film you're looking at, things are just spilling out into reality now in this strange way. You don't know what's going on. I understand it's completely natural. You don't know, so you have to consider every single possibility. And I am for sure not a person who would say, don't consider every possibility because this possibility is dangerous, or this possibility might make people think you're soft-minded, or might make people think you're racist, or this or that or the other thing, you know, whatever it is. Like, I think we need freedom to explore ideas, but we need to be critical while we do that. You've got to pay attention to the way this pattern is manifesting. The Noid is a perfect example. There's just no way. You know, the only way that we could think. So let's really do this. Let's take this seriously and step through it. Well, so let me start with my evidence that this couldn't be the result of human intervention. That is basically just that in the end, what we have is material that relates to very specific details of specific images of the event, you know? If it was just the placement of things like dates and the placement of things like, you know, things that just look like the Twin Towers, let's say, or something. If those were the only things we were finding in the fields, then I would agree. It would be plausible that maybe some human beings could have put these things there. Because it's like, we're going to do something to the Twin Towers on 9/11. It seems like it's a threat, like a little in-joke, an admission of a plan or something. But what I'm seeing is quite a bit more detailed than that. It's particular image structure of a particular picture from a particular moment in time. And no one could have known that in advance. No one could have known unless they saw it as a precognitive vision in extraordinary detail, you know. No one could know that explosion was going to have these weird accidental quote unquote properties that would resemble this weird little face, which is then this weird persistent, like in my opinion, statistically demonstratable, probably, associative space. I call it projection space because it's an image and a location on the two-dimensional plane of the cinema screen. So that's why it's projection space. So anyway, no one could have known that. That's so bizarre. And it's not just that. We also get this. We also get the little streaks that come out the bottom of it and all of this. And then it starts to seem like these things appear just because they resemble the shape, They just resemble the shape of that wound. So no one could have... So someone could have foreseen the event as a precognition and then put this kind of material in here, except for the fact that when you actually look at all of this material in the aggregate, it's like what happens at the end of Ghostbusters 2. The Statue of Liberty. By the way, what's happening right now with the Statue of Liberty and the poem and all this is fucking abysmal. It makes me very sad. And in general, everything to do with the migrant crisis and all of this just makes me very unhappy. It does relate to this because we are essentially abusing children at the kind of national level at the moment. By just orphaning, basically de facto orphaning like very many children in like things that resemble big like drone strikes, Sorry, I try not to get political here, but man, stuff like that just... I understand there are many points of view we can have about immigration and borders and all of that. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about just what we're doing to kids. So anyway, back to this here. The way in which the material is manifesting is often happening in a way where it couldn't have been placed. And so an example of that is the Statue of Liberty in Ghostbusters 2. It's, think about that. Well, first of all, let's just look at what happens in that shot, right? It's the Statue of Liberty's torch passes by the Twin Towers as if she's lighting them on fire. It's a tiny thing, but it's like the final image of this film that has many other, we talked about in the last episode, all the other weird ways it resembles, well, not all. We looked at a tiny part of the way in which Ghostbusters 2 and Ghostbusters corresponds to 9/11. So I think we can read it there. It's perfect that the film should end with that image, But think about how you make a film. How could that have been planned deliberately? That would have been a very hard thing to line up in that shot, I would think. It's completely about where the helicopter ends up in space, and it just ends up perfectly in space to allow that alignment to happen. I bet they saw that, and I bet it was an accident, and then they saw it in editing, and they were like, wow, that's cool, let's use that. That's what I think it was. I don't think anyone knew anything about fucking anything, man. I think people were just making movies. And then a lot of accidents happened in those movies. And it's very obvious, in my opinion. When you listen to some of these directors talk about their movies, they have no idea the weird shit that are in these movies. And I have to say... and this is maybe a little bit of a dangerous thing for me to say, because I actually think that there's an issue here that's going to get worse in the United States. We'll probably have to talk about that at some point. But anyway, I have to say, I've had this happen to me, okay? I'm an artist. I make art, and high-dimensional, apparently precognitive, or this temporally non-linear contents like this appear in my art. They just do sometimes appear there, and then I don't know it either until the thing happens, and then I go back and I'm like, oh god, yeah, I knew about this 2 days ago. I knew about it 2 days ago, and I drew a little picture of it, or I made a little video about it, or I did this or that. I just didn't know that's what I was doing. So I really feel that for me, looking at everything together, I have to defend this notion that the artists had no knowledge of this. No one had any knowledge of this. This is a mystery at a much, much higher level. And so that's very good, because it means that we can dispense with that very dangerous attitude that says that human beings were directly responsible for this. Except now, and because I want to be intellectually honest about this, I do want to note that there are, of course, always potential exceptions. And so here's a potential exception. We might say, okay, the material manifests in a way that couldn't have been done by human hands, directly. But maybe we could say that a very high-powered magician or occultist cast a spell, and the spell was kind of generic. The spell just said, give us an apocalypse, give us an end of the world. And they did some ritual that put some intense amount of energy into that. And then this is just the way it happened to magically manifest. And maybe at that level of magical practice, it's not necessary for a magician to know how it's going to happen. But if that's the case, you see, why is anything appearing in these films? Why should anything like that be happening? If I'm just a high-powered magician and I'm casting a spell, and I say, I want the end of the world, why should there be backspill of that into weird 80s movies and so on? How about that just produces the actual apocalypse? That would seem to be what you would get. Was another part of the spell that this magician said, like, and I would like you to put images of it in all my favorite movies. And he provided a list. By the way, I consider myself a magician, which is just to say I believe that magic is real and that it can be wielded to some extent, But that's exactly the thing about it, to some extent. Maybe I'm just a shit magician, but this stuff just doesn't seem to work that way to me at all. I don't really get to put in exact sort of deliberate requests that way. It's more about setting intention and allowing things to happen. And I never feel that I'm really that in control of it. And it's, this just seems to me to be more like a fantasy of what magic is than what actual magic is and what actual magical practice is. But I guess I have to say, of course, that's just my bias, really. That's my opinion. But anyway, if I'm casting that kind of spell, and let's say that I do have the ability to cast that kind of spell, I don't know. That just seems to me to be a very bizarre explanation. I don't like that explanation on completely aesthetic grounds, like divorced from the fact that I think it's a dangerous explanation. I think it's just an explanation that is unsatisfying to me, precisely because, to me, the occult is not some giant question mark that I can free project any nefarious thing I want into. I actually know a bit about the occult. I just think it's a practical body of knowledge for interfacing with the unconscious, in fact. So it's not that that's not mysterious. That's very profoundly mysterious, but there's a particular sense in which the occult has been demystified for me. So I just don't find it a convincing explanation for, I don't know, a number of reasons. But there's one particular point I want to make about it, I think, which is that, let's see, what is it? And, I guess we didn't really step through every single possible way we could consider this evil magician thought experiment. Maybe we'll return to that at some point. But I wanted to talk about it just to demonstrate that I think there are some really serious problems with that idea. And to point out that that's just one idea. I mean, if you think about it, there are really lots of strange theories we could come up with to explain how things like this could end up in a movie and elsewhere, just in other strange places, This is one that is very frightening. And so I think because it's very frightening, that gives it a little bit of mimetic energy. And so it's spreading around YouTube right now. Right now, this is kind of the primary carrier of this idea, that there is correspondent material in old films and 9/11. And sorry, but I just find that rather bothersome. I think we could look at many of these other explanations as well, because actually, here's what we know. Those of us who've seen this, we know that this pattern is occurring not at chance, because we've just seen some shit, eh? But that's really it. So that's a big question mark. But it's a question mark that does imply one thing very, very strongly, and it implies that something about our assumptions regarding time, something about that assumption set is incorrect, deeply incorrect, because there's no other way to account for this. Either you're going to go to some kind of an emergent explanation, or in which material is self-organizing in reference to information at a future point. So that violates linear time then, or it's some kind of a precognitive thing, or you, like me, personally, I go to God with this in the end. And I'm going to say something about that in a second. I'm going to put that up there so as not to forget about it. Say like God thoughts. There are many such explanations, but they all involve a shift in how we think about time at pretty much any level. Because if it's a magician, then we're admitting that magic is possible and that weird things like this can be summoned. And okay, right. That was one last thing I wanted to say about the evil magician ideas. A very popular idea out there is that the placement of the symbolic material in the films is that itself was the spell that then summoned 9/11. But I just don't think we can imagine that because of the image detail. So you're telling me that like someone drew a painting of the Twin Towers exploding with all of that specific information in it, and then found ways to deliberately encode that level of detail of the image of the apocalypse they wanted to see. This material couldn't have been placed, though I suppose we can still imagine that perhaps that too is somehow an aspect of a summoning procedure or something. Anyway, like I said, there are always ways there's no explanation of reality so bulletproof that you can't find a way to doubt it or undercut it. And by the same token, you can always suggest a way in which some other idea might be plausible. So that's just the case. We'll always be able to find some way in which we can say, well, it still could hypothetically be an evil magician, though. Yes, that's true. It could always hypothetically be that weird thing. But again, I think looking at the thing in aggregate, it just doesn't really look that way. It kind of thwarts that explanation in almost every way that it can, So anyway, okay, God thoughts. I think what we're looking at here is quite a bit like something like the double slit experiment. The people who were involved with that and the quantum physicists, a lot of them ended up developing very strange ontological attitudes about the world, including ideas about God and so on. I think it's a natural response to encountering really bizarre outlier data like this that destroys fundamental assumptions. I think any human being would have this kind of response to this material if they actually encountered the material in their awareness fully, because it stacks to a degree that you say, okay, it's just too much. But then how it's in something the world is not at all what you thought it was if something like this can happen. We're all in that situation and we're all reeling. I just want to issue a word of caution, really, if I can, and say, like, let's all be a little, let's think freely, but let's be very careful with theories that implicate specific people or specific groups of people. I'm bringing this up also because, the whole situation with Epstein, is it Stein or Steen? I don't even know. But, the fact that guy committed suicide or was offed or whatever we think happened, I'm open to, at this point, it's really, the story stinks. I don't have illusions about the prison system. I know people kill themselves in prison all the time, and I know that our prisons are abysmal and awful and that they're fucking terrible. And so, it could easily be that, like, this guy was just left alone and provided with things that he could kill himself with just because of negligence or because someone just some stupid guard thought it would be fun to kill the pedophile or allow the pedophile to kill himself, Who knows? Maybe he was targeted by big political forces. I'm sure there were I'm sure there were people planning that, even if it wasn't the way it fell in the end. So look, the whole thing is fucking terrible, but it's fanning the flames of a particular pedophile hysteria. There are two things that can be happening at the same time. There can be real pedophiles in the world, and they can be organized, and they can be sitting right in the middle of Hollywood. And there can be hysteria about that idea. It would be nice to be able to think about the idea without the hysteria, but because this issue of child abuse hits people very hard emotionally, it gets out of hand very quickly. And so as people making content and putting content onto YouTube, anyone with a YouTube channel has to take their responsibility a little bit seriously. You can fan flames or you can try to urge people to be a little more neutral. If you've made a decision that the evil wizards are destroying the world by sacrificing children or whatever the idea is, the whole point of your existence in the information space is to urge people to violent revolution, we can't really be friends exactly. We can talk, but that's not where I'm at with this. This is a complicated thing we're doing here, and we're guinea pigs here. We're the first people to see this thing. So I don't know. That's me giving some kind of weird parental lecture I have no right to give, but it's just I foresee violent and bad ends to that thing, and it pains me very much to think that anything that I've done might contribute to I don't know, some kind of a weird like sync ideation, like justified witch hunt of people or something. That's kind of what happened with Pizzagate. It wasn't a big disaster in the end, but the next one might be. And so I'm worried about that. I'm very worried about that. Oh well, I guess I just can't be that worried about it, because this is now at the level of a thing that's loose in the underground. This material is just it's out now. And I guess I have done my part in letting it out of the out of the canister, let's say. Obviously it was time. So I can't really, none of us can really think that we're too personally responsible for any of this. But at the same time, I think we do need to keep our empathy front and center, and remember that we're dealing with other human beings here. Even if we are dealing with evil wizards. To me, that's not an instant, go kill the evil wizards, Also, if that was really the situation, I wouldn't necessarily say we shouldn't go kill the evil wizards. I think we'd have to have a conversation about it. But my point is, let's not fly at okay, blah, 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 that's the end of that. I just want to issue a prayer, I guess, that we all make it through this. This is going to be a weird transition now. So we're going to react to this question mark in different ways, and that's just how it's going to be, I guess. I'm here to suggest that, because this is just how I ended up reacting to it in the end. To me, this went to a quite spiritual place fairly quickly. Maybe that's just something I wanted to believe, and so here comes along this big question mark, and I seized on that and said, aha, here's a big empty space. I'll just put God there because I always secretly wanted to believe in God or something. It's hard for me to say whether or not that's the case. Of course, I don't believe that's the case. That would be a weird thing to believe about myself. But if I was looking at myself from the outside or something, I would have to say, yeah, of course that's possible. But for me, I think it's more like this, though, because I'm not making any claim about what God is or what any of that means. I'm just saying that God is my marker for a giant intelligent thing that I don't understand what it is. And, it's like, it's Valis or zebra. I'm just saying I think that what I'm looking at, the structure that I perceive, is so high dimensional that it has to. This is the bugaboo of it. It has to be intelligent, yet it can't be human in the way that we normally think about it, because it has these godlike properties. It seems to know about things before they happened and so on. Very specific things. It's authored, but then it seems like it can't be authored. It's this perfect weird paradox. I'm impressed enough by what I see that I just think whatever managed to organize that so beautifully, so poetically, so artistically, so intelligently, and to organize it so virtuosically in its accident space. There's an aesthetic to sync. What's the name of that guy? Is it Rube Goldberg or something? I don't know. Those big elaborate machines. It's like those machines, but of coincidences. So it does it all so beautifully and so accurately, but then it also does it with a kind of a style and a grace. Like you get these runs of like insanely stacked coincidences. Like it's almost like it's just, it reminds me of how Michael Jackson sings. There's such an abundance of technique and ability and feeling, just everything. It's firing on every level. And it's paradoxical. It's a big performance, yet it's somehow intimate at the same time. And it's, what is it that we're looking at with all of this weird shit? The Noid, like, my God, all that weirdness. So I just say, okay, the big intelligent organizing thing that I don't know what it is, I think it put this here. That's all really I'm saying with that. The nature of that thing, I don't know. Maybe that because my statement about that is equally true if it's a personal hallucination that I'm having, If I'm just looping around in my own head with this churn on this weird 9/11 thing, I didn't really decide to do that exactly. I don't understand why I'm doing that. And then the pattern structure is just as impressive, except in this case, then it would be a pattern structure that I'm sort of inventing in my head and then kind of projecting outwards into the material, but it's still a high dimensional weird thing that I'm not consciously making because my consciousness is constantly surprised by what it's seeing. So then in that case, God's just somewhere in my brain. It's just precisely the unconscious. And the unconscious is just demonstrating to me the degree of the weird remix ride it can take me on, So in either case, I just think it's an accurate statement. Because that's the level of impressed I am by the show that this thing has put on. I can't imagine the show is an accident or a chance event. It's a show, man. Something made it. But the nature of that thing can't be like anything that we know about or understand. And that's really what God is. It's not representational. So I make claims about ghosts and all of this. That's really, strictly speaking, that stuff is, of course, conjecture. It's a bunch of theory. In that particular case, it's conjecture supported by my personal experience. But that doesn't mean anything to anyone, and no one should take that as evidence of anything. So, the stuff with the 9/11 dead and all of that, those are beliefs. Those are beliefs that I have, that I've formed because of subtle things in my real sync life, as it were, and not so subtle things in my real sync life that just indicate to me that that's what's going on. And because there's some support for that in the mythology. By which I mean in these films. However, strictly speaking, we don't know that at all. And so the relationship of these ideas about the transcendental organizer to ideas about the eternality of the soul and perception and all of this, that's all, who knows about any of that. Again, I have to point back simply to the question. We have material here that is high dimensionally synchronizing to 9/11 material. And that means that something very unusual is going on. And I think we all ought to just kind of cut the shit, really, and admit that we don't really know what's going on beyond that. It's good to talk about theories, and it's not good to kind of, undercut yourself all the time. We need to have a space for dialogue. And so I spend most of my time on this channel just immersed in my thinking about this, which includes a lot of assumptions and ideas and theories and conjectures and beliefs and attitudes and so on. And, I just think it's good to let that stuff hang. But at the same time, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm actually done talking about this now. I don't know if I'll include this or not, but I needed to make this just for myself, I think. So, okay.